My brother told everyone I was broke until I bought the building he rented from. My name is Stella, and I'm 62 years old, the night my brother burst into my house, shaking and clutching a stack of overdue rent notices. I thought he'd been robbed. His voice cracked as he begged, "Stella, please. You have to help me. The landlord's going to throw me out. You know what it's like to be broke." I remember just staring at him, because I couldn't decide what stunned me more, the audacity of what he said, or the fact that I was the landlord he was terrified of. He had no idea. Not while he stood in my living room. Not while he ranted about the heartless building owner. Not while he insisted I didn't understand financial stability. And how could he? This was the same brother who had spent months telling the entire town I was destitute, that I'd blown through my late husband's savings, that I was barely hanging on. People whispered, neighbors pitied me. Someone even tried to offer me a bag of canned food out of sympathy. I didn't know why my own brother wanted the world to believe I was drowning. I didn't know what he gained from humiliating me. But I did know one thing. The moment he finally discovered who owned the building he was renting from, the moment he realized the heartless landlord was the sister he lied about, his entire world would collapse in the most poetic way possible. And I was going to let the truth hit him exactly when it needed to. I never imagined that the person who would humiliate me most publicly would be my own younger brother. It started slowly, in the kind of subtle, slanted ways that sneak up on you before you realize something is wrong. At first, I didn't know anything was happening. I was simply going about my quiet life, managing my routines, organizing my finances the way I always had, keeping to myself in a way that felt peaceful after losing my husband years earlier. But one random Tuesday morning, while I was standing outside my house, pulling weeds from the garden bed, my neighbor leaned over the fence and asked if I was holding up okay financially. The question hit me like a slap. I stared at her, confused, trying to understand what she meant. She hesitated, then explained she'd heard from someone who'd heard from someone else that my finances had collapsed, that I'd supposedly made a mess of my husband's estate, that I was barely scraping by. I laughed at first, thinking it was a silly misunderstanding, but the look on her face told me she wasn't joking. She genuinely believed something was wrong. When I asked where she heard something so absurd, she lowered her voice and told me the name I least expected, my brother. It didn't make any sense. He knew nothing about my financial situation. We weren't close enough for him to make any claims about how I handled my money. And yet, over the next few days, the questions kept coming, from acquaintances at the grocery store, from a woman I used to work with, even from someone at church who approached me with pity radiating from her eyes. Every single time, I heard the same thing. My brother had told them I was broke. The humiliation seeped into my skin like cold water. It wasn't just embarrassing. It was deeply violating. What made everything worse was that people seemed so ready to believe him. I had spent my entire life being responsible, careful, and quiet. Maybe that was the problem. Quiet people become easy targets for loud liars. I learned that he'd been telling people I didn't know how to manage money, that I'd made bad investments, that I was living off canned soup and coupons. He even told someone I was thinking about selling my house because I couldn't keep up with the bills. None of it was true. Not even close. After my husband passed, I folded my grief into something productive. I educated myself on investments, budgeting, rental markets, and long-term planning. I worked hard. I saved. I sacrificed luxuries. I made choices that put my financial life in order. And I did it all quietly. But apparently quiet doesn't inspire respect. It just makes rumors easier to spread. The part that cut the deepest was realizing why he was doing it. My brother had always felt competitive with me, even though I never wanted competition. When we were young, he'd frame his achievements next to mine as if everything was a race. When we were adults, his need to appear more successful grew into something sharper, something uglier. My accomplishments didn't threaten him, but his perception of them did. Now, by painting me as the failed sibling, he elevated himself. He created a narrative where he was the stable, successful, reliable one, the one everyone admired, the one people praised. Meanwhile, I was reduced to some pitiable, fragile older sister who couldn't keep her life together. And the worst part, it was working. People believed him without question because he said it confidently, loudly, repeatedly. He weaponized his charisma to make his lies sound like facts. I considered confronting him, demanding to know why he'd chosen me as his punching bag, but I knew exactly how it would play out. He would deny everything. He would twist my words. He'd paint me as oversensitive or dramatic, and if he felt cornered, he would only double down on the lies. So I swallowed my anger. I stayed quiet. But in my silence, something inside me began to shift. A slow, simmering resolve started forming, like embers waiting for oxygen. If he wanted to turn the world against me, I would let him. For now. I didn't need to defend myself with words. I could defend myself with actions. And when the moment came, the truth would hit him harder than anything I could ever say aloud. A few weeks later, my phone rang. It was an old acquaintance from my husband's professional circle. She told me something unexpected, something about a commercial property downtown that was quietly preparing to go on the market. And the moment she said it, a spark lit inside me. I knew exactly what I needed to do. I hung up the phone knowing my brother had no idea his lies were about to become the foundation of his downfall. I always believed that truth has a way of floating to the surface, no matter how deeply someone tries to bury it. And in my brother's case, the truth didn't just float. It practically leaped out of the water the moment I stopped defending myself and simply started observing him. Because while he paraded around acting like the poster child of success, it didn't take long for the cracks in his perfect image to reveal themselves. It started with a conversation I overheard at a small cafe. Two women were discussing local businesses, and one of them mentioned my brother's shop, specifically that it wasn't doing well. I should have ignored it, but the curiosity pulled me in. One of them said, "He's months behind on the rent. If the landlord raises it even a little, he'll be out." I froze halfway through my coffee. My brother? Behind on rent? The same man who bragged about profits and expansions? The same man who spread rumors that I couldn't handle money? I didn't let myself react outwardly. I simply listened, absorbing every word, every whispered detail. And when I left the cafe, a realization simmered inside me. My brother wasn't just insecure, he was drowning, and instead of admitting it, he used me as the decoy. If he made me look broke, no one would look closely enough to notice that he was the one spiraling. Over the next week, I quietly pieced together what I could. I learned he had rented a commercial space downtown years earlier, back when his business still had a steady stream of customers. But over time, his careless spending, impulsive purchases, and constant need to look successful ate away at his profits. He reinvested nothing. He saved nothing. Everything went into appearances, flashy upgrades, fancy equipment, showy renovations that didn't generate any real growth. The irony was almost poetic. He accused me of financial incompetence while single-handedly running his own shop into the ground. I found out through a mutual acquaintance, one of my late husband's friends, that my brother had been privately panicking for months. He was terrified the landlord would raise the rent or refuse to extend the lease because of his payment history. Apparently, he'd been avoiding the landlord's calls, dodging meetings, and making excuses about temporary cash flow issues. But the real turning point happened when this acquaintance mentioned something else. "There's talk that the building might go up for sale." He said it casually, like it wasn't the kind of information that could reshape my entire world. But I felt the shift immediately. That was the same building I'd heard about. The one whispered through the grapevine as possibly hitting the market quietly. The one that housed my brother's business. I didn't say a word to anyone. Instead, I went home, closed the door, and sat with my thoughts. Because suddenly, for the first time since my brother started dragging my name through the mud, I saw a path toward justice that didn't require shouting or public arguments. A way to reclaim my dignity without stooping to his level. A way to show him exactly who he had been underestimating. If I bought the building, he would have no choice but to deal with me. Not as the sister he mocked, but as the landlord he depended on. He would have to pay rent to the very woman he insisted was broke, and he wouldn't be able to spin, lie, or brag his way out of it. Facts don't bend. And so, in the quiet of my living room, I began taking out the folders that held years of financial planning. Investments I'd nurtured, savings I'd protected, documents I'd organized carefully after my husband died. I laid them all across the table. I reviewed account balances, estimates, mortgage options, and strategies. For the first time in a long time, instead of mourning what I had lost, I felt the strength of what I had built. The idea of poetic justice didn't just appeal to me, it invigorated me. This wouldn't be revenge for revenge's sake. This would be a restoration, a correction of the lies he'd spread, a quiet, powerful reminder that humility wins more battles than arrogance. I contacted a real estate agent discreetly. I asked general questions at first, nothing that revealed my true motivation. I didn't want my brother catching wind of anything. I needed to move smarter than he ever had. And as the days passed, I tracked every shift in the building's status, every whisper, every rumor, every hint of movement behind the scenes. Then, one evening, just as I was finishing dinner, my phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from the agent. The subject line made my heart pound. Confirmed. Building, preparing for private sale. And in that instant, I knew everything was about to change. I've learned that life rarely hands you opportunities wrapped neatly in ribbon. More often, they come disguised as passing comments, quiet rumors, or unexpected emails. And when my agent confirmed that the building was entering a private sale phase, I knew I had only a small window to act, if I wanted to secure not just the property, but the justice I'd been quietly constructing in my mind. I reached out to the agent that same night. I kept my voice steady, professional, careful not to sound overly eager. "I'd like to take a look at the building before the listing goes public," I told her, "and I'd prefer that my inquiry remain confidential." She didn't question me. If anything, she seemed familiar with buyers who valued discretion. Within hours, she had arranged a private showing for early the next morning. I barely slept that night. Not out of excitement, though there was some of that, but because the gravity of what I was doing began to settle into my bones. I wasn't just investing in property, I was reclaiming my narrative, piece by piece, brick by brick. The next morning, the building's owner met us outside. He was older, soft-spoken, and walking with a cane. I recognized immediately the exhaustion in his eyes, the kind that comes from years of carrying responsibilities you no longer have the strength for. "I'll be honest," he said to me as we shook hands. "I'm looking for a clean, fast sale. I don't have the energy for drawn-out negotiations." His candor surprised me, but I appreciated it. It told me he wasn't playing games. We walked through the building slowly. The structure itself was solid. Older, yes, but well-maintained. The hallways carried the faint scent of aging wood and old paint, but nothing that couldn't be refreshed. The layout was practical, and the spaces had good natural light. As I moved through each floor, I mentally cataloged potential improvements: updated lighting, fresh flooring, maybe a new security system. Then, as we turned a corner on the main level, I saw my brother's shop through the glass window. His big, glossy sign hung above the entrance, far too expensive for the revenue he was probably generating. Inside, he was laughing with a customer, completely oblivious to the fact that his world was slowly shifting beneath his feet. The sight didn't bring me joy, or anger, or vindication, not yet. What it brought was clarity. This wasn't about revenge, it was about balance, accountability, correction. If he had treated me with respect, none of this would have been necessary. But he chose arrogance, and now he would face something far more powerful than anger: the consequences of his own choices. The owner watched me quietly as I stood there. "Your brother's place?" he asked gently. I blinked, startled. "You knew?" He chuckled. "Small town, people talk, but from what I understand, you keep to yourself. That tells me something important." I didn't respond, but I saw respect in his eyes, something I rarely saw when people spoke about me lately. And in that moment, I felt a surge of confidence I hadn't expected. We went to his office upstairs to discuss the numbers. I relied heavily on the financial lessons my husband had taught me over the years: how to analyze long-term value over short-term emotion, how to stay calm even when negotiations felt personal, and how to lead with facts instead of fear. The owner noticed. "You're far more prepared than most buyers," he said with an approving nod. "Your brother, he was interested once, you know. But he came in loud, unfocused, talking more than listening. You're different." I didn't comment. I didn't need to. By the end of the meeting, we had outlined preliminary terms. They were fair, realistic, and within reach. When the agent slid the paperwork across the desk for me to place the deposit, my hand didn't shake. I signed my name with a sense of strength I hadn't felt in a long time. As soon as the deposit cleared, the building was effectively reserved for me, pending final documentation. It felt surreal. This huge, life-altering decision carried out so quietly, with no one in my family knowing a thing, especially not my brother. Keeping it from him became a mission in itself. I avoided certain streets. I avoided conversations where news might slip. I stayed measured, calm, and discreet. In the days that followed, I began planning the future of the building. I researched property management companies, tenant communication protocols, long-term maintenance strategies, and the potential returns from improving certain units. I didn't want to be a landlord who ruled with emotion. I wanted to be one who ruled with structure. Just when everything seemed steady, when I began to believe the next steps would unfold smoothly, my phone rang. It was the owner. His voice was tense. "Stella," he said, "I don't want to alarm you, but someone else is trying to swoop in with an offer, and from what I've heard, it might be someone you know." My breath caught. Could it be my brother? The moment the owner told me another buyer had appeared, my heart lurched. My first thought, my only thought, was that my brother had somehow found out what I was doing. Maybe he overheard something. Maybe someone mentioned seeing me with the agent. Maybe he'd gotten wind of the sale through one of his endless social circles. The possibility wrapped itself around my chest like a tightening rope. If he was trying to block me, he wasn't just competing. He was trying to take back control. The same control he had stolen from me when he dragged my reputation through the mud. I didn't allow myself to panic, though. Panic makes people sloppy. And if I was going to win this race, I had to stay calm, measured, and focused. I immediately contacted my agent, who dropped everything and met with me within the hour. We sat across a small conference table, paperwork spread between us like a battlefield. "I'll find out who the competing bidder is," she promised, "but you need to be prepared. If their offer is higher or stronger, the seller might consider it." I nodded, though inside, fear rippled through me. I had invested too much, emotionally, financially, mentally, to lose this now. The hours that followed felt endless. I tried to distract myself by reviewing my folder of documents, but every time I looked at the pages, my brother's voice echoed in my head. "Stella doesn't know how to handle money. She's been struggling for years. I don't know how she's getting by." Those lies had wounded me deeply, but they also fueled me now. If he was bidding, he would finally understand just how wrong he'd been. When my agent called back later, that evening, I braced myself. "It's not your brother," she said immediately. Relief washed through me in a hot, dizzying wave. I hadn't realized how tightly I'd been gripping the edge of the table until those words loosened my fingers. "But," she continued, "the other buyer is offering aggressive terms. Higher deposit, faster projected closing. They're trying to overwhelm the seller with speed." Speed I could match. Overcompensation I did not need. "What do you want to do?" she asked. I took a breath, thinking not just about the building, but about the broader symbolism, about reclaiming my dignity, about owning something my brother depended on, about correcting the power imbalance he had so recklessly created. "I want to adjust my offer slightly," I said. Not to match their aggression, but to reinforce my seriousness. It wasn't about outshouting them. It was about proving my steadiness. We crafted a carefully balanced proposal, a modest increase in price, a clear timeline, and the reassurance of my financial stability. No games, no theatrics, just facts, just as my husband had taught me. The seller responded within hours. "She's exactly the kind of buyer I'm looking for," the message said. "Practical, reliable, thoughtful, not someone who throws money around impulsively." My offer resonated. While negotiations continued, I moved full steam into due diligence. Inspections were completed. The financial structure of the building was reviewed. I analyzed leases, responsibilities, tenant histories, and potential liabilities. That's when I saw my brother's file for the first time. Rent, severely overdue. Payment history, erratic. Warnings, multiple. My throat tightened as I read. Seeing the evidence in black and white made my stomach knot. Everything people had whispered about him. Every rumor about his struggling business, it was all true. And yet he still found the audacity to mock me publicly, to call me financially incompetent. It wasn't just hypocritical, it was cruel. But instead of bitterness, something steadier filled me, a sense of purpose. If my brother wanted to pretend he was thriving while dragging me down, then he would now learn the value of humility from a position he didn't expect, as my tenant. The inspections checked out, the financials aligned. All that remained was finalizing the paperwork and securing financing. My investments were solid enough that I didn't need to borrow much, and the approval came through smoothly. Each signed form, each initial, each stamped page felt like a quiet victory. When my agent called to tell me the seller had officially chosen me, the weight of the last few weeks lifted from my shoulders. After everything, after the humiliation, the rumors, the sleepless nights, I had won the race without ever needing to sprint. But fate wasn't done with me yet. Just as I hung up, my phone buzzed again. A different number, the seller's number. And when I answered, his voice held an urgency I hadn't heard before. "Stella," he said, "congratulations. The building is officially yours. But you should know. Your brother just learned the property has been sold." My heart stuttered. He was about to find out exactly who bought it, and I knew my world, and his, was about to change forever. The morning the sale officially closed, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the final documents spread neatly in front of me. The building was mine. The keys, the responsibility, the authority. Every piece of it now belonged to me. It struck me as both surreal and deeply satisfying. My brother had spent months telling people I was broke, incapable, financially unstable. And yet here I was, buying an entire commercial property without needing a single cent of help from anyone. I didn't tell a soul. Not my extended family, not my neighbors, and certainly not my brother. Silence had become my shield, and now, my strategy. Once everything was finalized, the first thing I did was request the full tenant portfolio. I sat down with a binder, thick enough to be a college textbook, and opened it, page by page. Each tenant had a file, lease terms, payment histories, notes on behavior, maintenance requests. It didn't take long before I reached my brother's section, and even though I was prepared, emotionally braced, mentally steady, the reality still hit harder than I expected. He wasn't just a few months behind. He was deeply in arrears. Multiple warnings, several broken promises, not a single attempt to catch up. He had been dodging the landlord for so long that the notes were practically a diary of frustration. Seeing it in ink, on paper, felt like another betrayal. He had lied about me while hiding the truth about himself. He had mocked my financial choices while ignoring his own disaster. It wasn't just irresponsible, it was reckless, selfish, deliberate. But I didn't let anger steer me. I forced myself to focus on the practical tasks at hand. The next step was sending formal introduction notices. I drafted a clean, professional letter addressed to each tenant, informing them that I was now the owner and that all future communication would go through the property manager I planned to hire. I wanted this transition to feel orderly and transparent, not emotional or chaotic. I hired a property manager named Janine, a competent, no-nonsense woman who handled difficult tenants with a blend of firmness and diplomacy. She didn't know my personal history with one of the occupants, and I didn't tell her, not yet. I wanted her interactions with my brother to be purely professional. When she reviewed his file, she raised an eyebrow. "This one might be a problem," she said. "Oh, I'm aware," I replied simply. "Just treat him like any other tenant." She nodded and began preparing the meeting schedule. Every tenant would sit down with her over the next 2 weeks to review expectations, leases, and any outstanding issues. Meanwhile, I started drafting a list of renovation goals. The building was sturdy, but it needed updates. New lighting systems, repainting, a couple of security upgrades, improvements the previous owner never had the energy for. I walked through the halls with a notebook in hand, jotting down ideas, sketching layouts, imagining what the property could become with a little care and smart investment. And as I walked from floor to floor, I realized something unexpected. I felt secure. Not just financially, though that was part of it. I felt secure in myself, in my ability to make decisions, in my independence. in the years of discipline and planning that had quietly shaped my life. All the lies my brother had told about me, they couldn't touch this feeling. They crumbled against reality. Of course, the first shockwave returned to him faster than I expected. Janine mailed the formal notices, and 3 days later, he received his. According to the timestamp on the email she forwarded me, he opened the attachment within minutes. 5 minutes after that, he left his first voicemail for the property office, his voice tense, defensive, slightly panicked. He seemed terrified that the new landlord would finally do what the previous one never had, hold him accountable. He didn't know it was me, and I wasn't going to tell him. Not yet. His meeting with Janine was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I didn't plan on attending. I wasn't ready to reveal myself, and besides, this wasn't about emotion. It was about establishing order, standards, professionalism, something he had never shown. That evening, after Janine had locked in all the appointments and emailed the reminders, I sat in my living room, feeling the contrast between the truth of my life and the fiction he had painted. Financially broke? I had just completed the largest purchase of my life. Incompetent? I had managed the entire negotiation with precision. Weak? I had kept silent when silence served me best. He had no idea what was coming. Just as I finished jotting down renovation notes, my phone rang. When I saw my brother's name on the screen, I almost didn't answer. But curiosity won. I lifted the phone, and his voice burst through before I could even say hello. "Stella, you won't believe this," he said. "The building sold, and the new landlord is already acting like some rich tyrant. I might get kicked out. I need help. Can you lend me some money?" I sat back, stunned. He was begging the broke sister for financial help. Because of me, the landlord he didn't know he feared. When my brother called me that night, I could hear the panic crackling through the phone like static. He didn't even take a breath before launching into his rant. "Stella, you don't understand," he began, his voice rising with every word. "This new landlord is unbelievable. Greedy, cold. They're threatening to increase rent unless I pay all my back payments immediately. It's extortion." I almost laughed. Extortion? He had been behind on rent for months, years, by the looks of his file. But I kept my voice steady, neutral. "What happened exactly?" I asked, though I already knew every detail. It was surreal, listening to him describe my property manager as though she were some villain while having no idea he was talking to the person pulling every string. He sighed dramatically. "They're demanding payment, full payment. No more extensions, no more excuses, all because this new landlord wants to empty pockets and flex power." Then he added, with a bitter edge, "People like that never care about actual hard-working folks." The hypocrisy hit me so hard I had to grip the arm of my chair. Hard-working. He had spent years lying about me, while barely holding his own business together, and now he was angry that someone, me, was holding him to basic responsibilities. "I see," I said quietly. "You see?" he snapped. "Stella, I'm in trouble here. Real trouble. If I don't pay, I could lose my shop, my livelihood, everything I've built." Everything he had built. He never remembered what others built, only what he believed he deserved. "And what do you need from me?" I asked, gently nudging him toward the real reason for the call. Finally, he dropped his pride. "I need money," he said bluntly. "Just a loan. Just enough to cover the arrears and maybe the next month or two. I'll pay you back once business picks up. You know, whenever that happens." A part of me had expected this, but hearing it out loud, after everything he had said about me being broke, was almost unbelievable. He had painted me as financially incompetent to anyone who would listen. He had humiliated me publicly, used my name as the punchline in conversations I wasn't even present for, and now he wanted me to save him. For a moment, I couldn't speak, not because I didn't know what to say, but because the truth of his character had finally become unmistakably clear. He didn't just lack self-awareness, he lacked accountability. "I can't do that," I said softly. There was a long silence, followed by a disbelieving scoff. "You're refusing? Seriously? I thought you of all people would understand how embarrassing this is for me." "You mean like how embarrassing it was when you told everyone I was broke?" The words slipped out before I could stop them. Not loud, not sharp, but steady. He paused. "Oh, come on, Stella. Those were just jokes. You take things too personally." "Just jokes, just jokes." That was the moment the final thread of sympathy inside me snapped. All the years of him minimizing his cruelty, all the times he dismissed my feelings, all the ways he twisted situations to avoid responsibility, it all crystallized into something painfully clear. He wasn't just irresponsible. He was entitled. Deeply, profoundly entitled. "I'm sorry," I said calmly, "but I can't help you with money." "Wow," he spat. "I guess I shouldn't be surprised. You've always been selfish. Always." The irony almost stunned me. Selfish? He was the one who used me to prop up his own image. He was the one who lied about me to elevate himself. He was the one asking for money after painting me as destitute. But when I didn't immediately rescue him, I was selfish. He hung up without another word. Over the next week, I watched his panic grow through secondhand reports from Janine, my property manager. She kept everything professional, telling him exactly what was expected. Full payment, on time, in accordance with his lease. No special treatment. No indulgence. He tried to negotiate, deflect, blame the previous owner, promise future payments. None of it worked. Janine was polite but firm, precisely how I wanted her to be. As the days passed, he scrambled. He tried borrowing from friends. He tried holding clearance sales that barely made a dent. He tried pretending everything was fine while quietly falling apart. And through it all, I prepared. Not out of cruel anticipation, but because I knew the moment of truth was coming. The moment when silence would no longer be enough. The moment when he would finally understand the weight of his actions, not through my anger, but through reality itself. Then, one crisp morning, Janine sent me a message. "Final meeting scheduled with your brother regarding his tenancy. Thursday at 3 p.m. Important that you attend." I read it twice. My pulse steadied. My decision was made. It was time to face him. When Thursday arrived, I woke with a kind of calm I hadn't felt in months. It wasn't the soothing calm of peace. It was the focused calm of clarity. I knew what I had to do, and for the first time since my brother began smearing my name, I felt completely steady. This wasn't revenge driven by emotion. This was accountability shaped by truth. I drove to the building early, parking in the back, where the tenants wouldn't immediately notice my car. I wanted a moment to breathe before stepping into the role I had kept hidden. I stood for a few seconds outside the entrance, hand on the door, reminding myself that I wasn't just the older sister he belittled. I was the owner of the entire building he depended on. When I walked inside, Janine was already waiting near the small conference room we used for meetings. She gave me a small nod. "He's running a few minutes late," she said, checking her clipboard. "But once he arrives, I'll introduce you formally." Those words, simple as they were, felt monumental. Introduce you formally. I had waited for this moment without even realizing it. A few minutes later, I heard the familiar sound of my brother's voice echoing down the hallway, the same loud, performative tone he always used when he wanted to assert control. But there was something underneath it now, a thin thread of worry he couldn't hide. When he stepped into the conference room and saw me sitting at the table, he blinked in confusion. "Stella, what are you doing here?" he asked, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Are you here for moral support or something? Because honestly, I'm dealing with this landlord situation, and it's a nightmare." Moral support. Of course, that's what he assumed, that I was here in the same powerless position he had always relegated me to. Before I could respond, Janine stepped in smoothly. "Actually," she said, "I'd like to introduce you properly. Stella isn't here as a guest. She is the owner of this building." The silence that followed was sharp enough to slice through stone. My brother's mouth opened slightly, but nothing came out. He stared at me the way someone looks at an optical illusion, convinced it must be a trick. "What?" he finally whispered. I met his stare without flinching. "I bought the building. Weeks ago." His face shifted from shock to disbelief to humiliation, so raw I could practically feel it vibrating in the room. He sat down slowly, like his knees had forgotten how to hold him. "You?" he breathed. "You bought this whole building?" "Yes," I said quietly. "I did." He shook his head as if trying to force the world back into the shape he preferred. "But that doesn't make sense. I thought—" He stopped himself, but the implication hung in the air like smoke. "You thought I was broke?" I finished for him. You thought I couldn't manage money? You told everyone I was struggling, that I was falling apart, that I couldn't handle my own life. He looked down, cheeks reddening, jaw tight. I continued, my voice steady but not cruel. I've been financially independent for years. I saved, I invested, I planned. I learned everything I needed to after I lost my husband. I've been responsible while you've been pretending. He swallowed hard. I didn't mean anything by it, he muttered. It was just, harmless bragging. Harmless? My voice sharpened, not loud, but precise. You humiliated me. You made people pity me. You made me look incompetent to neighbors, coworkers, family. You didn't do it because you were proud. You did it because you wanted people to think you were better than me. He opened his mouth to argue, but nothing came out. And now, I added, you're months behind on rent. Your file is a disaster. Your payment history is irresponsible. You've ignored warnings, skipped meetings, and made excuses. His face tightened, wounded pride leaking through. So what? You're kicking me out? I took a breath. This was the moment where emotion could take over, but I didn't let it. This isn't personal, I said. I am your landlord. And as your landlord, I have to make decisions based on what's best for the building, the tenants, and the future of this place. Not your ego. Janine slid the documents in front of him, outlining arrears, deadlines, and possible outcomes. The reality landed on him like an invisible weight. He looked between the papers and me, unable to find footing in either direction. You can't do this, he whispered. For the first time, he sounded small. Human. You're my sister, and you are my tenant, I replied calmly. Those roles are separate now. He stared at me with something between fear and disbelief. The illusions he had built around me were collapsing, and he didn't know how to exist without them. I folded my hands on the table. You can stay, I said slowly, but only if you meet one final condition. He looked up sharply, breath caught. What condition? I let the silence hang, the weight of the moment building, until I spoke the words that would define everything that came next. When I finally told my brother he could stay in the building only if he met one last condition. The tension in the room thickened like humid air. He stared at me, jaw clenched, eyes darting between me and the documents Janine had prepared. He looked like a man who had been running in the dark and suddenly found himself cornered by the very wall he had been pretending didn't exist. The condition, I said calmly, is accountability. Genuine, written, documented accountability. He frowned. What does that mean? Just tell me straight. It means, I replied, sliding the papers toward him, you must sign a formal acknowledgement of your arrears. You must agree to a repayment plan, one that is realistic, consistent, and enforceable. And you must make every payment on time. No excuses, no extensions, no disappearing when responsibilities get uncomfortable. His face burned red. That's harsh, Stella. It's fair, I corrected, and it's exactly what I require from every other tenant. For a moment, he looked like he might argue. His chest rose and fell in frustration. Then anger sprang forward. I can't believe you're doing this. I'm your brother. I'm family. I kept my expression neutral. Family is not a shield from responsibility. Not anymore. He threw his hands up. You're acting like some dictator. All this power is going to your head. I felt a flicker of something. Was it sadness? Maybe, but it passed quickly. If I wanted to act like a dictator, I said evenly, I could evict you today. Instead, I'm offering you a structured path to stay. He glared at me, but the fight was fading. Reality was louder than his pride. Finally, after what felt like a full minute of silent struggle, he let his shoulders drop. Fine, he muttered. I'll sign whatever you want. I nodded, signaling Janine. She guided him through each document, line by line, ensuring he understood every clause. His signature appeared shaky, hurried, almost resentful, but it was there, binding, official, and undeniable. When he was done, I added the final boundary. From this point on, I told him, all communication about the building, your payments, and your lease goes through Janine, not me. Why? He demanded. Because our personal relationship cannot survive you treating me like your bank, or your servant, I said. Keeping business separate is the only way forward. He scoffed but didn't argue. The power he used to wield through arrogance, excuses, and loud charm had evaporated. After he left the room, Janine exhaled. You handled that remarkably well. It wasn't power I felt, it was clarity. Over the next several weeks, life in the building shifted noticeably. Tenants who had once felt overlooked now approached me, through Janine, with genuine gratitude. They appreciated the repairs I immediately invested in, the new lighting in the hallways, the fresh coats of paint, the upgraded fire safety system. I focused my energy on creating a place people felt safe in, respected, and heard. And it worked. It's nice to have an owner who actually cares, one longtime tenant told Janine, who later relayed the message to me with a smile. Their appreciation filled me in a way I never expected. For years, I had lived quietly, almost shrinking myself so others wouldn't feel threatened by my strength. Now, I wasn't shrinking, I was leading. My brother, meanwhile, was wrestling with the consequences of his own behavior. He made the first payment late, but he made it. The second payment came in 2 parts, but it arrived. He was struggling, stumbling, clearly unaccustomed to being held to standards, but he was doing it. The weight of accountability was reshaping him, even if he didn't recognize it yet. Meanwhile, whispers in the community shifted. People who had once spoken to me with pity now looked at me with curiosity, and then respect. They learned I had bought a commercial building. They saw renovations happening. The facade of Stella the broke sister began cracking under the truth of Stella the investor, Stella the owner, Stella the woman who built her life back piece by piece. My brother heard the whispers too. I could tell by the stiff, embarrassed way he avoided eye contact when he passed Janine. His lies were unraveling like loose thread. Without his story about my poverty, he was forced to face the fact that he had underestimated me entirely. But through all of it, I maintained professionalism. I didn't gloat. I didn't boast. I didn't correct or expose him publicly. I did what he never did for me. I held dignity close and let the truth speak for itself. Then, one evening, Janine forwarded me a message. He wants to meet with you privately, she said. He says he has something important he wants to admit. I stared at the text for a long, still moment. After everything, after the lies, the humiliation, the arrogance, what could he possibly want to? Confess? I agreed to the meeting, unaware that what he was about to say would shift everything once again. When my brother finally asked for a private meeting, I wasn't sure what version of him I would encounter. The arrogant showman who insisted on being the center of every room, or the humbled tenant slowly learning that accountability was not optional. I arrived at the small office inside the building early, wanting a moment to settle myself before he walked in. I didn't want anger or pride or satisfaction to cloud the conversation. I wanted truth, clean, clear, and unembellished. He walked in quietly. That alone surprised me. His shoulders were lower, his steps slower. He closed the door behind him and stood for a moment, gripping the back of the chair like he needed support. For the first time in a long time, he didn't look like the man who bragged to anyone who would listen. He looked like someone who had run out of places to hide. "Stella," he said, voice thin, "thank you for meeting with me." I nodded. "Sit down." He lowered himself into the chair across from me, exhaling shakily. For several seconds, he said nothing. He simply stared at his hands, twisting them together like he was afraid they might fall apart if he let go. "I owe you an apology," he finally said. The words seemed to scrape their way out of him. A real one, not the kind where I pretend things were harmless or funny. I mean an actual apology. I stayed silent. I wanted him to speak freely, without me guiding him. He swallowed hard. "I shouldn't have told people you were broke, or that you were struggling, or any of the things I said. None of it was true. I knew it wasn't true. His voice cracked slightly. "I just didn't want people comparing me to you." My breath caught, not because of the confession itself, but because of how plainly he said it. There was no mask now, no smirk, no excuses. He continued, "You've always been resilient. You lost your husband, but you didn't fall apart. You kept going. You built your life back. Not loudly, not bragging about it, just doing it. And people respected you for that. I saw it. Everyone saw it. And I I didn't know how to deal with that. Jealousy, the root of everything. I thought if I made you look weaker, he said, voice barely above a whisper, I'd look stronger. I never meant for it to go so far, but I didn't stop myself. I wanted people to think I was the successful one. I finally spoke. You didn't just make me look weak. You hurt me. My voice wasn't angry. It was simply honest. You humiliated me. You made neighbors pity me. You made people question my character. You created a version of me that wasn't real, and you let them believe it. He nodded rapidly, eyes wet. I know, and I'm sorry. I really am. I held his gaze. Sorry isn't a reset button. It doesn't erase the damage. It doesn't give back the dignity you took. And it doesn't mean things go back to how they were. He let out a slow, shaky breath. I understand. We sat in silence for a moment before he spoke again. Look, he said carefully, I'm not asking for special treatment. I know I've put myself in this situation. I signed the repayment plan. I'm making the payments. I'm trying. And I want to keep trying. I want to be better. Not just as your tenant, but as your brother. It was the first time he had spoken the word brother with weight instead of entitlement. I leaned back, considering everything. His apology didn't erase the past, but it acknowledged it, and that mattered. I'm willing to move forward, I said slowly, but with boundaries, strong ones. He nodded. Whatever they are, I'll follow them. You'll continue your lease under the same terms as every other tenant, I said. No exceptions. You'll make every payment. You'll communicate through Janine. You'll respect the building, and you'll respect me, not because I'm your sister, but because I'm your landlord. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I will. And as for being my brother, I continued, that relationship only works if it's built on honesty and respect. Being family doesn't erase accountability. It never has. He lowered his head. I know, and I'm finally seeing that. In the months that followed, he surprised me. He made his payments, sometimes barely, sometimes with effort, but always on time. His business stabilized as he learned to manage responsibly instead of performatively. He stopped bragging. He stopped pretending. He started living truthfully, even when the truth was uncomfortable. And as he changed, so did I. Owning the building, setting boundaries, holding firm, it all reshaped me. I felt stronger, grounded, steady in a way I hadn't felt since before my husband passed. I realized that reclaiming your power doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it comes quietly, through choices, discipline, and the refusal to shrink. One afternoon, as I locked up after a day of renovations, I stood in the hallway and felt something shift inside me. A sense of peace, maybe, or closure. My brother once told the world I was broke. Now he paid rent to me. But this was never about revenge. Not really. It was about truth, about reclaiming my story after someone else tried to write it for me. And as I walked out of the building I now owned, I understood something clearly. I didn't need to shout to win. I simply needed to stand tall in the life I built, quietly, steadily, powerfully. In the end, I didn't defeat my brother with anger or revenge. I did it by standing firm in the truth he tried so hard to bury. The lies he spread couldn't survive the reality I built with patience, responsibility, and quiet strength. He finally learned that dignity doesn't make noise, but it always makes an impact. And I learned that sometimes the most powerful justice is simply reclaiming the life someone once tried to rewrite. Tell me, have you ever had someone underestimate you, only to be shocked by who you really are? Stories like these remind us how many silent battles people fight and how much strength often goes unseen. If this journey moved you or made you think of someone in your own life, don't let it end here. Share this with someone who might need the reminder. And stay connected so you don't miss the next story that might speak to you too.